the top level of sports car racing right now, you've got Toyota racing themselves, basically, right, at the top
Mhm.
category. Modern performance cars are almost too fast. They're
Yeah.
too quick, I think. It's dangerous. Now, I do a lot of iRacing, whether it's to learn a new track or, just to go drive. I like the competition for the sake of being competitive. The wheels are basically locked together. So if one wheel's turning, the other wheel's turning at the same speed, no matter the speed of the car. So in a 15-minute session, by the time you get maybe a 3-minute outlap in, you're warming up your tires, that sort of thing. You don't have a whole lot of laps to put in, a fast lap. A new driver on a racetrack is breaking these habits that we have from driving on the street. And braking tends to be a very common one.
Welcome to Stripping the Dipping. You're joined by usual dynamic duo of the brilliant F1blag and AMG Denz, aka the MDA, Motorsport's David Attenborough. Thought I'd add that one in there. And just like David Attenborough, we've been exploring the world of motorsports, more different perspectives, high and low. And with this being episode 7 of our summer shutdown series, there's no difference, as we have a great guest on today. I hope our listeners will be very excited as we are to introduce a professional touring car driver, a driver coach, and a design engineer as well. It's the marvelous Mike Ogren. Mike, how are you keeping? And are you currently joining us from Tampa, Florida? If that's correct.
Yeah, that's all pretty accurate. I am doing excellent. Thank you guys for having me on here. Very excited for it. And yeah, I'm in the Tampa, Florida area, Dunedin specifically. So just outside Tampa, pretty just moved to a new home, pretty close to the beach. I'm pretty excited about it.
That's brilliant, man. And we got so much to explore about you as well, Mike. Kind of your career as well, the work you've done for Nissan as well, which is really exciting. And also as well, whilst we know that you're in Tampa at the moment, could you just tell us about growing up and kind of your earliest motorsport memories? If I'm correct, the internet, so I'm gonna blame the internet for this, was saying that you grew up in Detroit, Michigan. Is that correct as well?
Close. So I
Ooh.
actually grew up back here in the Tampa, Florida area. So I kind of moved back to where I grew up, but I did spend about 6 years in the Detroit area as a design engineer for Nissan. You got that part right. But I will, a quick update on that. I actually stepped away from that position earlier this year. So I need to make an update on the search result for my my engineering status. Um,
Yeah, but no doubt there, Mike. And thank you for that update too. What we like to do with all the guests as well, this is like an icebreaker, is
yep,
you mentioned growing up in Tampa and just
yep.
kind of your kind of relevant work experience and stuff like that too. Could you kind of give us insight into the beginning of your journey? Like, what were your earliest motorsport memories growing up?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So I was pretty lucky. As a little kid, my dad worked at and owned an auto mechanic, repair shop. Did a lot of race car stuff there. So I was around cars and race cars specifically from a pretty early age, and I got into a go kart when I was very young. Probably don't want to say the exact number because I don't think my mom still knows exactly what that age was. So but just running around out back of the shop when I was, I don't know, 4 years old or something like that. And then kind of progressed into racing karts, and then moved up into autocross competition, as soon as I could. Got my racing license as early as I could for road racing. I think before I had my street driving license even, did a little bit of circle track stuff when I was in high school. And then progressed up into amateur racing, and been very fortunate the last few years to be doing pro racing stuff and SRO and IMSA a little bit. And as far as kind of just some other, like you said, being very fortunate to be in Florida. I remember going to the Sebring 12 hour as a kid, and watching. Those are kind of when Audi was dominant, right? The R8 and the R10, the R15, those LMP1 cars, and that kind of helped me fall in love with the technical side of it and the just incredible capability of what you get to watch racing cars, and just the whole what an incredible event. If you've never been to the Sebring 12 hour, it's pretty awesome. Just a huge party all weekend and a pretty amazing motorsport spectacle.
Absolutely. And Blag, I'll tag you in as well.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Sebring there, and hi, it's good to meet you, F1blag here from Twitter. I was on your YouTube channel. You can blame me for the bad research, looking at your LinkedIn.
No.
But seeing you, your highlight video around Sebring, watching you sort of crossed up, overtaking cars, really sort of on the edge of grip. It looks fantastic. So I'm looking forward to getting into that with you today. You talked a bit about your journey into motorsport. I expect you're also a huge fan of the sport itself, and I wonder what your first memory is of watching motorsport and whether you had any idols growing up.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'm glad you touched on Sebring because it's my home track. I could talk about it all day. I got a lot of thoughts on that, but yeah. As far as watching, like I said, going to the Sebring 12 hour in person was pretty formative for me. Of course, I watched on TV as much as I could. And, we all consider kind of F1 the pinnacle. But I actually didn't watch so much F1 growing up that I can remember. And then kind of by the time I got into it, it was, Lewis is just going to win again. So it wasn't so interesting to me, which is, a little bit backwards, especially from the technical, it's just incredible technical achievements that Formula One cars are capable of. And as far as kind of idols or heroes for racing, this might sound a little silly, but I kind of fell in love with the cars more so than any particular driver. Like I said, watching, an Audi LMP car go through turn one at Sebring, in the dark, those diesel cars, especially, they're almost silent. You just see them coming and then they disappear, barely slowing down for turn one, going, 130 miles an hour, something like that. And you never even heard them coming. It was just incredible, the aerodynamics and the grip that was, that they were capable of. So I don't know if it kind of answers your question, or maybe a non-answer to your question, but I'm a real kind of nerd for the cars and what we get to, operate when we're out there on the racetrack.
No, absolutely. And, again, while I was doing my research, aka internet stalking, something your website said that was particularly it really stood out was you were talking about your passions. And if the sort of engineering side and the cars and the technical side are your passions, then having the day job and the hobby in the same space must be fantastic. What are you driving, or what are you racing at the moment? If you don't mind me asking.
Yeah, certainly. So, so I'm racing the in SRO competition. I'm doing a partial season with the Skip Barber racing team. It's also who I happen to instruct with quite a bit. It's the Skip Barber Racing School. But as part of their operation, they run a few Honda Civics. So both some Civic SIs and some Civic Type Rs in the TC and TCA classes of SRO competition. So I had the privilege to race the Type R TC car at Sebring last year, and then I'm racing the SI TCA car this year at a couple of rounds, including Sebring next month. I'm pretty excited about that. So these cars are, kind of maybe the easiest entry step into the professional racing world. Yes, they're a proper, factory race car from Honda. You can buy them right from HPD, Honda Performance Development, turnkey, ready to go. And they're the engine is actually it's a stock engine. Of course, the usual racing modifications are made: suspension, slick tires, some brake updates, stripped out roll cage, that kind of stuff. But it's pretty neat that you've got a class that I believe everything is effectively stock powertrains with a couple of different tunes available for BOP. Give you a little bit more power, a little bit less power across the different makes and models within the class. But yeah, that's what I'm up to right now. And then additionally, I also have I think the video that you referenced is from a Volkswagen Scirocco, so an old hatchback Scirocco that my dad actually built originally a long time ago, and then I bought it back again when I was in college from another owner. So that car is actually much more extensively modified. Basically, the only stock remaining component is the displacement of the engine is limited to stock displacement, but it's increased compression, welded differential, front wheel drive car, which is pretty wild experience. Full suspension, all that kind of stuff. Engine's tuned. But yeah, that car's been in kind of a family endeavor for a long time. So I get the good fortune of racing both of those this year.
I love that you said your dad sort of put that car together and then you bought it back off someone. It was almost like keeping it, bringing a lost family member back in or something. I don't know if it
Yeah,
felt
it's
like
exactly right. It was a pretty cool to kind of stumble back across that car and then bring it back and bring it back up to speed.
Well, look, I've got one more question and then I'll hand to Denz. When I was watching you race that Scirocco and you mentioned it's been in the family for a while. The one thing that really stood out was when you're braking into a corner, the engine, you've got full engine braking and it was like ear-piercingly loud. It was fantastic. How long, how many miles do those engines tend to last? In the UK, there's a comedy called Only Fools and Horses, and there's a character that's known not to be very intelligent. And he gets an award after using the same broom for 30 years. And he says it's had 17 different handles and 10 different heads, not realizing it's completely different things. So tell us on this Scirocco, how long does the engine last? Do you have to replace the parts quite frequently?
It's pretty resilient. I'd say we rebuild the engine maybe once a year, so it'll go through most of a season. If we're pretty gentle with it. I think that the car is inherently pretty loud, so it maybe makes it sound a little more violent than I hope that it is. But like I mentioned too, with that car, it's got a welded differential in the front axle. So I imagine a lot of maybe you guys and listeners are pretty familiar with a limited slip differential, but welding it means it's fully the wheels are basically locked together. So if one wheel's turning, the other wheel's turning at the same speed, no matter the speed of the car. So some cars have kind of a whether you're on power or off power, they'll change how much those wheels are locked together, kind of a mechanical limited slip. But this car's welded. So what that means is you kind of have to give up a little bit more entry speed and then accelerate maybe a bit sooner than you would in a rear wheel drive car, for example, or even a front wheel drive car that's got just a traditional limited slip differential like the Civic that I mentioned. So you have to kind of slow a little bit earlier into the corner, get your gear shifts, your downshifts done a little bit sooner. So I'm guessing that may be contributing to it sounding a little bit strange, maybe loading up that engine a little bit more on entry than you'd be used to. But no, I'll tell you what, even just driving the car around the paddock, if you don't have earplugs in or something, it's quite loud.
Gosh, yeah, look, no slight to your driving. I'm imagining myself tootling around at sort of 40 miles an hour or something. You were really getting it in. It looked amazing. And the way you were describing there were some in the highlight clip on its own, which I think is only 2 minutes. There were some instances where you were kind of coming into a corner and then all of a sudden just overtaking cars on exit, which looked fabulous. Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, sorry, I give the compliments as well.
I do appreciate that.
Yeah. So I mean, on the motorsport side, on the racing side, you're currently in the SRO racing your Civic, linked to your instructing. Do you have any sort of dreams or aspirations on the motorsport side? Is it a hobby? Is it a passion? How would you class your time in motorsport?
Yeah, so again, a good question. I think the simple answer is, I want to be doing that full time. I want to be at a racetrack as often as possible, and part of the as I mentioned earlier, stepped away from my my engineering, my nice, stable, consistent engineering role with a prominent company, Nissan, to pursue this as full time as I can. So that I think that's a pretty good indication that it's what I want to be doing, and I've been doing things on the side as often as possible, racing, coaching, whatever can get me to a track. But it got to the point where I can only take so much time away from the job that's paying me to work every day. And I had to start turning things down, saying no to opportunities. And again, as I imagine you all know in the racing world, if you say no once, it's very rare to get a second call. So it was kind of informative to say, okay, this is, I can be an engineer forever. I'm 30 years old right now, so kind of at the, racing is a sport where you can do maybe later into life than most other maybe stick and ball type sports. But again, if you want to really pursue it at the high level, there is maybe a little bit more of a time cap or an age cap to be very, very good at it. So kind of decided, I'm very fortunate to have a supportive wife who has grown to love motorsports, and we kind of made the decision together to say, hey, let's go jump in the deep end and see where this takes me. So that decision was on April 1st of this year. So I'm only about 4 months into being a quote unquote full-time driver and instructor, but it's been very rewarding so far, and I want to continue growing with that. Right, I want to be, I want to drive in the Sebring 12 hour. I want to win the Sebring 12 hour. We have aspirations, my wife and I, have running our own team at a very high level, IMSA, SRO, that kind of stuff. With kind of the knowledge that we have, she's a very talented marketing individual, and that's a pretty good combination when you have a marketing logistics expert paired with a technical and driving expert. Hopefully we can make some good things happen. So we want to be at the top of the sports car world.
Gosh, that's I hadn't realized that we were possibly one of your first interviews since you made that life-changing decision, and chasing
certainly.
your dreams is something that we talk to a lot of people here. We had a surfer on actually in the last episode that we've published, and it's about people following their dreams, and so it's really inspiring to hear that. Chip Ganassi, that's got a sort of sound to it. Roger Penske, these big teams. Are you MO Motorsport? Are you coming up with a team name? Is your wife looking at that?
Yeah, so Mo Motorsports has been the
Nice.
kind of the branding that we came up with a couple of years ago when I ran my first pro season, which was the Micro Cup up in Canada. So I don't know how familiar you all might be with that, but we again, that was kind of the first pro endeavor that we took on. And decided, we got to brand this out, and that's what we came up with. So far, that's been pretty good. The Micro is really interesting. That's a car that I think is available in the UK and in Europe, but not in the States. So racing that car in Canada was pretty neat. Racing a car that you can't even drive, you can't even buy in where I lived. So. Yeah,
the Micro is a car that in the UK is hugely popular. It's been around for several generations. I hadn't realized it isn't available in the States. Is it available in Canada? Like, why would they have a racing series?
So the car is, again, working at Nissan, I got pretty good insight into this. The cars are made in Mexico. You can purchase them in Mexico. They also ship them to Canada. You can purchase them in Canada. So they're shipped through the United States to Canada, but you cannot buy them in the United States. It's pretty fascinating. I think the concern was that they would take away from Versa sales, another kind of small hatchback that Nissan makes and sells. But I don't know. The Micro is an absolute riot to race, and that series is a really good time.
And they're tiny cars. I mean, in general,
they're very small,
from a US perspective.
Right.
So, adding to my list of, searching you on the internet, I think my research suggests you're quite tall for a racing driver.
Yeah.
Does that affect it?
If you're 6'1".
Yeah. Well, every man exaggerates a little bit, don't they? But does that affect it when you've got a car that's stripped back, every sort of ounce of weight reduced? How does that affect you in that sort of racing, or does it?
Yeah, it's a good point. So most racing series, the minimum weight for the car, of course, the lighter the car and driver a combination, the faster you'll be. Less mass to accelerate, corner, and brake is always good. But usually the minimum weights are done as a combined driver and car. So you'll see, like in Formula One, for example, you see as soon as the guys get out of the car, they hop on a scale before they even talk to anybody, right? And that's to make sure that they're combined. That they will then weigh the car separately, and that combined driver and car must weigh some minimum number of kilograms or pounds or wherever you are in the world. So fortunately, I'm a pretty thin guy. So being tall hasn't really been a disadvantage in that way. But what is interesting is some cars, the Civic that I'm racing, for example, with a helmet on and a roll cage, kind of lowering the roof line, it's a tight fit, which is something you maybe wouldn't think of. But with a tin top, touring car, if you are relatively tall, the amount of distance between your head and the top of the car can be limiting for a tall driver. The Micra was surprisingly spacious in that regard. I never had any issues, but the Civic is, if I hit a big bump at Sebring, for example, I might tap the roll cage, and it's a little strange.
Gosh, well, I'm going to use that as a guy who claims to be 6'2". That's my excuse for never making it anywhere in motorsport.
Perfect, you're too tall.
My head kept hitting the roof. Exactly.
That's right.
I'll tag back to Denz. Over to you.
Thank you there, Blag. And Mike, we've had some really interesting and fascinating insight, into the world of the touring car driving, also what it's like to, drive a very competitive, Honda Civic with its more like front wheel drive setup and stuff like this too. Just on the topic, of that like series of racing when we talk about like touring cars, so cars which, are road cars, but can be heavily modified, but in the same sense, you can flip it the other way around and say you have a heavily modified car that someone can buy in a showroom as well. In terms of like, getting entry into motorsport and being able to race as a driver as well, do you find that this is a more cost-effective way of like trying to get into a competitive series?
Yeah, certainly. And I think that's a pretty popular question, right? A lot of people think they want to go racing or at least do track days or get on a track, and kind of what's the best way to do that? What's the most cost-effective way to do that? And I think, for someone that's newer to it, of course, people who are more experienced, I love racing cars like that. You can throw them around. You can be a little more aggressive with them than you can, I don't know, a GT3 car, for example, right? But yeah, for a newer driver that wants to go racing, this is a car, again, the Civic as an example, you can buy it right from Honda, ready to go, and maybe you don't need to go race it at the pro level to start. But I think out the door I could look this up, but I think maybe under $60,000 US, which is, not cheap, certainly, but, it's a lot less than a 911 GT3 street car, even, way less. So a lot of people think that they have to have something crazy fast just to go on a racetrack. And I think that's a pretty backwards way of trying to learn. If you can do things properly and be relatively quick in a Civic, or I don't know, Miata, of course, is very popular, at least in the States, as an entry level track car or race car. Those skills all translate incredibly well to, once you start to get into faster cars, more powerful cars, more modified cars. But it's I hate it when I show up to, if I go to coach someone and they show up for their first ever track day and they've got a 911 GT3 or something, right? And those cars, like modern performance cars, are almost too fast. They're too quick, I think. It's dangerous. You've got someone who's never been on a racetrack can easily go 180 miles an hour at Sebring. That's big speed, and very difficult to correct mistakes at that speed. So yeah, I wholeheartedly support kind of the lower horsepower, more approachable cars, for sure, as a beginner. And I would say even I think they're much more enjoyable to race even too, because you can be a little more aggressive. The speeds you're carrying are a little bit less dangerous. You can, get away with being very tight with other cars a little more so than you can even with faster race cars.
Absolutely there, Mike. And also kind of on the topic as well about, the spectrum of different cars and racing series and stuff like that as well. I really liked that earlier on in the podcast, you mentioned kind of your love of the prototype series, racing in the IMSA and like Le Mans and stuff like that too. And, you gave me a huge flashback to the days of like the Audi R10 TDI, the Peugeot 908 HDI as well, Bentley Speed 8 kind of prototype car as well. In the kind of new world of racing that we have, especially like in the world endurance, Le Mans kind of series, there's been a huge emphasis and a push on like sustainable and like hybrid styled vehicles in the hypercars class that's been announced as well, from the LMDH series to also the LMH series. So we've seen BMW, Porsche, Cadillac, Peugeot kind of re-enter into this really interesting like series that's going to be reborn as well. What's your take on this? And like, is it a thing you feel where we're going in the right direction with the kind of nature of these newer style cars and formulas? Is it good that it's going to open the door to more manufacturers getting involved in racing, or do you still think that maybe it's a bit of a premature step and there's probably still other considerations that need to be taken in these series?
Yeah, that's a very very detailed question, but I think I think you almost answered your own question right out of the gate. If that many manufacturers signed up for this new formula, it clearly has to be a good direction, right? I mean, look at the top level of sports car racing right now. You've got Toyota racing themselves, basically, right, at the top category, and losing against themselves by the car breaking on the last lap, which was heartbreaking, at Le Mans a few years back. But I think, like you said, there's something like 7 manufacturers that are for sure in at the new top level, and I think the work that IMSA and the European folks have done to allow the LMDH cars and the LMH cars to compete in an equal playing field and be eligible in both series is incredible. I think there's like right now the Sebring 12 hour, using that example again, they run 2 different races. They run the Sebring 12 hour for IMSA, and they run the WEC 1000 hours of Sebring. And, like I said, when I was growing up going to that race, it was one race. It was same eligibility. So I don't know if they'll go back to that in that example or not. But the fact that they're the same formula or the same eligibility, I think, is incredible. Whether or not the push towards hybrid and maybe a little bit more complication, a little bit more cost, I understand those are supposed to be, I think, a spec unit. So maybe they'll limit development, which should keep costs down. I think the world is naturally moving in that direction, but maybe not as quickly as a lot of, a lot of people think that it is interesting. But again, that technology, if we're doing it properly, should be coming from the top down in motorsports, whether it's Formula One, IMSA, WEC, these prototype cars that can demonstrate, hey, hybrid technology can be fast and exciting and fun. We've seen it with electric cars, right? It used to be, it's an appliance, it's an efficiency thing. Well, all these new electric vehicles that are coming out have incredible capability, way more so than a traditional combustion engine vehicle. And I think that's kind of turned the equation on its head and made both hybrids and electric vehicles kind of more desirable, right? It's cool now. They're fast. They're exciting. So I think that formula is brilliant at the top end right now.
Absolutely. It's a really exciting time, and kind of in a way as well, I think it's going to open up so many more opportunities for, different drivers that maybe didn't get a factory seat before now to get in with customer teams and stuff like that as well. So it's a huge eye opener, and, I think almost like a rebirth of an entire kind of motor kind of sport discipline too, which had been
certainly
on the decline, as you mentioned as well, with Toyota really racing themselves. I know that they had Glickenhaus too, but again, kind of, even though it's an LMP1 car, completely different in terms of the pace and stuff like that, and the BOP. Right. So, completely different. And also kind of talking on the engineering aspect of things as well, Mike, we also mentioned earlier in the show that, you were a design engineer for Nissan. What did that entail? And, could you kind of explain to the listeners as well, kind of the links and how transferable some of that was as well in terms of your racing career?
Yeah, certainly. So I was a chassis design engineer in the Farmington Hills office in Michigan, right outside the Detroit area in the United States. And we were responsible in that office for basically any vehicle that was made in the United States. So that would be Altima, Maxima, the Pathfinder SUV, Rogue SUV, among a couple of others, some Infinity products as well. And my specific responsibilities, I bounced around within the chassis department a little bit, but I touched, wheels, tires, hub bearings, springs, stabilizer bars, shocks, a pretty good look at a lot of the bits that go into the corner of a car. And our specific responsibilities, again, for kind of American-made or vehicles that were made in American plants, was kind of interesting, right? As a Japanese global company, and I think this is fairly common. A lot of the upfront development is done in Japan, as you might expect, and then that would be received by the American office at some point to kind of bring to completion. So we would do a lot of kind of testing of components and finalizing the designs rather than like a clean sheet. And then, of course, continuing to improve and develop those designs throughout the life of the program of the vehicle, whether that was making them, more cost effective to manufacture, or improve reliability in the field. If there's some concern with a particular component, to continually improve those designs. So it was much more kind of within the lifespan of the vehicle on the road, rather than kind of clean sheet, really far out development. We're a little bit further downstream than that, which I actually found pretty interesting, because I could walk out to a parking lot and say, hey, I designed that tire, or I talked, I worked with whomever the wheel company was to bring that design to life, or hey, we just changed this component and I know that it's gonna perform better than the previous one, and I can point to it on a car outside, rather than saying, oh yeah, this thing that I designed is gonna maybe see the light of day in 10 years or something.
Exactly, and like as you mentioned there too, there's just so many things in modern day car design where, like, either for safety, either for efficiency, either for sustainability of, like, the resources that we have in the world as well. There's so many different considerations that, come into it. And I feel, especially, you working in Detroit, Michigan as well, Motor City, as they like to call it,
Yep.
I can kind of see, the links there and the connections, and it really makes for quite an interesting perspective as well. So thank you for that, Mike. And also another kind of facet we haven't touched, like, man, you're like an onion in a good way. Like, there's so many different layers to you as well,
Yeah,
man.
good.
I think
No, I'm happy to talk cars all day long, for sure.
exactly. But one other layer I think I wanted to peel back with you as well, man, was, we also know that you coach as part of the Skip Barber Racing School program as well.
Yep.
For our listeners on this side of the pond in Europe, could you tell them about this amazing program? What kind of cars are on the training fleet as well? Is it more touring cars? Is it a mix of like open wheelers? And for you, just like, what is the most rewarding part of being a driver coach?
Sorry, I think I lost your last comment there.
Oh
For
yeah,
you, and I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch you.
yeah, no worries. I'll repeat it. And just the last bit of that as well was, what do you find the most rewarding part of being a driver coach?
Gotcha. Sure. So, so Skip Barber Racing School, I think, is it certainly is kind of the most prominent racing school in North America. It may be a little bit less familiar to European folks or that side of the pond, but Sergio Perez may be a good example of a Skip Barber graduate. We've had multiple Indy 500 winners, a bunch of guys in NASCAR, a bunch of people in Formula One that went to Skip Barber Racing School as a as part of their development as a racing driver, whether when they were younger or even maybe further into their career. Recently, we've had a lot of folks from NASCAR. Again, I'm not so sure how much of a European following there is for NASCAR, but they're running a lot more road courses than they used to. Going to COTA, Road America, Mid Ohio, and some of those guys have come out to Skip Barber, as professional racing, NASCAR drivers having years of experience at circle tracks, but maybe limited experience on road courses, humble themselves to come out and try to learn how to be a good road course racing driver. So kind of having that level of, clout or just the image of Skip Barber Racing is that's where you go to become a proper racing driver. I think that's really cool that we've got folks that are far into their career still coming back to try to become better as professional drivers. And what we currently have in the fleet right now is mostly one category of Mustang Gts. So I believe the chassis code is S197. So like the early 2000s Mustangs, kind of the first iteration of the retro Mustang when they brought it back, right? So these are Mustang GTs, which are we run them on a street tire, and they're just incredible school cars. They they have a lot of body roll. They have a lot of enough power to be fast and exciting, but not enough to to get you in trouble unless you do something real aggressive with the cars. And I think they're an incredible teaching tool. Again, on street tires, you get a decent amount of slip. You get a lot of audible feedback from the tire. So really approachable, help you learn the limit of the cars. And then kind of our other main category is Formula 4 cars. So we have, I believe now, the world's largest fleet of F4 cars.
Wow.
We've kind of collected them from other, racing series that have gone defunct in all over the world. I know there are some cars we recently got from Mexico, some from Australia, but they're all kind of the same formula. So kind of getting those to our school spec is pretty interesting. And to me, they're kind of the total opposite of the Mustangs. They're again, it's a formula car, open wheel. We've got decent aerodynamics. They do everything immediately. We run them on slick tires. You get relatively little feedback in the way of body roll or pitch or squat or tire noise. Things happen very quickly. But of course, there's nothing like driving a formula car. And if that's what you want to do, we have an option for that. So the very kind of different schools of thought and how to drive each particular car, and depending on what you want out of it, they're pretty interesting, very different solutions. We do a couple of other things too. We'll run the Civics, for example, you can use to go through a school, and then a couple of other options as well. So yeah, it's really cool to see Skip Barber, kind of back. There was the previous ownership had gone through some bankruptcy issues and was recently bought about 5 years ago from the current group, and they've really invested back into the company and the image of the company and having it be very prominent again. So funny story, I was at Lime Rock with doing a Skip Barber program a couple of weeks ago, and Skip Barber, the man, his grandson actually came through our teen driving program while I was there that week. So that if the man himself that started the company is willing to send his grandson back through it, it's back in good hands. So I'm really excited to to do a lot of work with Skip Barber among kind of my other commitments and things I'm doing on my own as well.
Absolutely, and they're such a reputable brand as well, Mike, as you mentioned there too. And I think it's amazing as well, like you mentioned, there's the plethora of drivers and skills and even just, professional racing drivers which are quite declarated, putting themselves through that kind of training kind of program as well, because, it's one of the top level schools in the entire world when it comes to, professional top echelon driving. So I can definitely attest to that. And, I'm quite familiar with the brand too. And kind of a segue question. Thank you. In relation to that too, was Mike, how do you keep yourself sharp away from the track, when it's not race weekend? Are there particular things that you like to do, such as going back to the roots with go-karting? Do you indulge a little bit in the sim racing too? Because funny enough, with Skip Barber, I know that they also have quite a nice infinity with the iRacing guys as well. So yeah, we see a lot of people like myself, which don't necessarily have the budget to get into full-time racing, but trying to take the tools available through the sim racing world as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I sim race quite a bit. I'm actually sitting in my sim kind of setup right now because it's a very comfortable Sparco seat that I've gotten here, and it's where I like to kind of do anything racing related, whether that's joining a podcast or jumping on iRacing for a bit. So yeah, I've got a decent sim setup at home. I do a pretty good amount of iRacing. I continue to intend to jump into their kind of other competitors to get a little bit different flavor on the sim racing world. But no, I do a lot of iRacing. whether it's to learn a new track or, just to go drive. I like the competition for the sake of being competitive, jumping into an official race and, getting practice being around other cars, like you said, and finding some nuance of, racing TCR cars, for example, which I've done in real life, how well that translates, that kind of stuff. And then honestly, I think coaching, I think there's an old, saying that, teaching is one of the best ways to learn, right? So anytime I'm at a racetrack, there's, if I'm watching or helping students, at whatever level they are, it kind of helps inform my own driving, right? Whether that's, okay, this person did something particular in this corner and it was very quick, maybe it was a little unconventional, but it looked really good. Those are all kind of bits of information to file away. Whether even not being behind the wheel, right? Watching other people or learning how they approach things is very informative. And then I also should have mentioned the Formula 4 cars that I was talking about, and I think you had just mentioned that were added to iRacing as well. Skip Barber also runs a series using the F4 cars that actually races mostly on SRO weekends as of this year, which is really cool. So you get a lot of mostly pretty young kids that just come out of karting or sim racing, whatever it is, racing very, very well, very, very fast kids in these F4 cars. So that's part of what I do with Skip Barber is I coach those guys as well on race weekends. So I did that at Watkins Glen a couple weeks back, and I'll be at Road America helping with that next week as well. So again, just very informative for me as a driver if I'm helping coach these kids that are at a very high level. If I'm explaining something, it kind of even helps me learn as well. So
absolutely, and it's so kind of interesting to see the symmetry between like both worlds in one aspect, and kind of a segue into the next question I was going to ask you, Mike, is how close do you feel like sims? I'm going to use iRacing as an example, and they really need to start giving us that bread as well, because we talk about them too often on this podcast. But this is bringing it back to the question there, Mike. Like, we know that with iRacing, they take a really kind of methodical approach to building the tracks and the cars into the simulator. A lot of the tracks are what we call laser scan. So it's not just like artists, like, making a sketch of the circuit, but them actually taking some really expensive gadgetry. I don't even want to know the price of it, man. It'll probably be 10 Honda Civics.
That'd be a lot.
Exactly. Just to kind of rebuild and kind of like remodel the tracks into the simulator. For yourself, Mike, you've done laps at some of these really legendary circuits. You mentioned Sebring as well, Virginia International Raceway too. How close, not really in terms of the tire model, but just in terms of the aesthetics and the bumps and stuff like that, does a sim kind of a product like iRacing come to the real life equivalent?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I listened to a few podcasts, a few of your podcasts, trying to prep for this and familiarize myself a little bit more. And I think this has come up maybe previously, probably a few times. So my personal take is that for learning a new track, it's incredibly valuable, especially if you have a car, TCR, they have a ton of GT4 cars, whatever it is, not so much on the lower end besides the MX-5 Cup car. But if you can get a car that's close to what you expect to be racing at a track, and go to a new track that you've never been to, being able to drop into your first practice session at a real track, having turned laps there before, just it speeds up the learning process so quickly. So instead of taking 10 laps to learn just a basic braking marker for a particular corner, maybe it takes you 2, because you've already done 100 laps there on the sim, and it's somewhere between, I don't know, the 4 and the 3, for example, let's just say. So instead of challenging yourself from way farther back and giving yourself a margin for error, you can take much more specific bites and much smaller bites to get closer to your final product, and jump right in the deep end. I think from that aspect, it's very, very good. I found that there's some areas of VIR in particular that maybe hasn't been updated quite as recently. And there's some like runoff areas, for example, that are absolutely the racing line. There's kind of some extra concrete and the exits of a couple of corners where you're almost outside the kind of curbing that you must use, and that's not present in iRacing in a couple of places, or at least maybe not as wide or whatever it is. And I found that driving that it actually limited me because I was adjusting my line, to drive the iRacing track, turning in a little bit too sharply or a little bit too late, rather than what I would do in the real world. And I found that it limited me a little bit. But of course, that's a pretty high level difference, where, again, from the very basic track modeling, if it's up to date, I think is absolutely incredible. And you touched on, like the bumps at Sebring. I think that's one thing that iRacing or probably any sim does very, very well, is it forces you, of course, because you're not getting, feedback through your body and in the seat of the car, to use, visual, and mostly visual, but also like some audible cues.
Hi there, Mike. I think we might have
But also
just lost
visually,
you.
right?
Sorry there. Oh,
I think I'm back. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
hi there, Mike.
Yeah,
Indeed we
All
can.
right.
Indeed we can. So Mike, just to smoothly segue back into this, man.
Sure.
You mentioned as well. I thought it was really intriguing, just to hear kind of like how, in a way, the sim had kind of like got you up to scratch to a certain degree with like the track, corners, apexes, just getting familiar with it. But at the same time, too, one shouldn't become completely reliant on it or use it, as the gospel, because as you mentioned as well, tracks are something that are always evolving, and they obviously evolve before they do in the sim. And in some cases, if you just rely on the sim, you can then develop certain like constraints or habits which aren't conducive, to the current track state. So I thought that was really intriguing, and kind of to segue it back to like, the real world of racing as well. Mike, you've raced in some really awesome series, the SWCA, IMSA, Michelin Pilot, obviously the very prominent SRO Touring Car America series too. For our viewers at home, could you give them an insight into what the average race weekend will look up in terms of its build up to race day, and some of the things you'll do in terms of setup or, other approaches that you'll take to a race weekend?
Yeah, sure. So you're saying from the time you get to the track through the end of the weekend, or even before that?
Yeah. So,
Okay.
or you can include before the weekend as well, because that will give us
Sure.
some really interesting insight too.
Yeah, I mean, I think I touched a little bit on, kind of before a weekend. I like to jump in a sim or watch video of, if there is any out there, of that track, if it's something I'm unfamiliar with, or a car at a track that I've not driven before. But that, that's kind of the bulk of it. And then getting to the track, of course, you get in, excuse me, usually a day or two ahead of on-track activities. If there's a track walk, I usually like to do a track walk, even if it's a track that I know well. I think you summarized well my comment about sim racing. Maybe it's a track you've been to even last week or 100 times before. There may be something new. There may be a new bump forming, a new visual reference that you can use for a turn-in point or a braking mark or something like that. So I always like to do a track walk. That's usually like the day before practice starts, something like that. And there'll be some discussion, with your team, your engineers, your techs, if there's other drivers on your team, of, what your starting point will be. And maybe usually the car should be set up kind of how you expect it to be, when it gets to the track. There'll be some, I remember when we came here last time, the car worked really well with, the shock set to this and these tire pressures, that type of thing. So usually, we'll just go through that, make sure there's no changes. And then, practice one rolls around and go out. Usually what we like to do, at least in the first practice, is go run, maybe 10, 15 minutes, come in and check tire pressures, make sure that they're building in a way that we expect, and still reasonable, so that you're getting good feedback from the car, and you're not getting kind of bad data by having, tire pressures be off, because those are, of course, the only way that you're connected to the ground. So if tire pressures are off, it can mask maybe a lot of other good data, or setup data from the car. So then I like to go back out, finish out a session. I like to get a nice, good long run in as early as possible to understand how the car is going to evolve, as grip falls away or tires get worn down, especially in a front wheel drive car. So the Civics, in particular, over so the SRO format is a 40-minute race. Over 40 minutes, you gain, the car tends to understeer more and more throughout a race. So understanding exactly how that is gonna go as soon as possible helps you make good setup decisions where, okay, well, maybe we dial it in so it's got some oversteer at the start, as much as you can with a front wheel drive car, which can be difficult, so that you're minimizing the understeer later in the race. So I like to do that in the first practice. Come in, debrief, make any setup changes. Second practice, usually again for an SRO weekend, there's 2 practice sessions. So second practice, maybe do some shorter runs, try to dial in a little bit more qualifying pace if there's any, very small adjustments to make, that sort of thing. And qualifying is very hectic in SRO. It's 15-minute sessions. So at, say, a longer track, a VIR, a Sebring, those are almost 2.5-minute laps in these cars. So in a 15-minute session, by the time you get maybe a 3-minute out lap in, you're warming up your tires, that sort of thing, you don't have a whole lot of laps to put in, a fast lap. So you have to get up to speed very, very quickly in order to be competitive in qualifying. And then it's, debrief, see where you're at on the grid. Usually the first race is the same day of qualifying. So prepping, kind of any, understanding where you're going to be on the grid, you're going to be on the inside line, the outside line, having a good feel for where the start is going to happen. Maybe watch some other races, see where they start, see where the green flag is given, so you can get, a nice jump at the start of the race. And then go into the race, see what you can do. Hopefully spray some champagne, whatever it is. Pro tip is you don't want to spray too much champagne on day 1 because you got to wear your stuff again for day 2. So, and then day 2, rinse and repeat, make any changes that you need to. Often the Sunday race, so day 2, will be in the morning, whereas the Saturday race is in the afternoon. So maybe there's some setup changes you make based on the time of day. If it's a little bit less hot out, as it tends to be in the morning, maybe you'll have a little bit more grip because the track's not so greasy, that type of thing. So if there's any adjustments you need to make for those reasons, you do those, usually Saturday night, so you're ready to roll Sunday morning, go out and try to bring home more hardware on Sunday. That's the very basic version of what an SRO kind of race weekend looks like, at least for the on track and in between portions. And of course, I like to look at data and video in between each session too. Maybe I should have very specifically mentioned that. Again, if you have other drivers that are driving in your class, we all like to compare data, see what one of us is doing better than the other. Say, holy crap, that guy's going through this corner faster than me. There's no reason I can't do it, right? So that's how you get up to speed very quickly, is having very a talented team of drivers that are willing to share data. Is it helps you all go faster together, I think.
Absolutely, Mike. And that was really informative and insightful. Look into how, at least from a racing driver's perspective as well, like you prepare and develop and, build for a race weekend too. And just like you mentioned there as well, there's so many, very slight but very big kind of things that impact a way a weekend could go as well, in terms of the setup direction. You mentioned there as well, there's 2 races at 2 different times of day as well. So of course, maybe for the second race, the track actual temperature might be a bit lower or a bit higher up depending on the circumstances. That obviously influences the tire pressures, which then has a knock-on effect on the handling characteristics of the car
exactly.
as well. And having, I guess, also the skills you mentioned, which you would have honed through kind of your time and, what you do with the Skip Barber Racing School as well, I imagine is really key in, finding the balance of the car and getting the maximum performance from it at all times. So I found that really insightful. I'm sure listeners will as well. And before I tag my dynamic teammate Blag back into this too, I just wanted to ask you just a quirky question just in terms of the racing side of things as well, Mike. We know that there's lots of drivers that have different superstitions or quirks that they like to do before a race, before they jump in the cockpit. Do you have any fascinating ones or any kind of interesting precursors or superstitions you do before you start a race, before you jump in and put your helmet on?
I'm trying to. I knew where you were going with that as soon as you started saying it, and I was trying to think. I think I'm pretty boring. I don't really have. I've tried to be much more flexible I found that it, basically no is my short answer, but I found that that allows me to have a much more clear kind of headspace. It's a lot easier to have a good race or a good, any type of sporting endeavor, if you're more flexible, right? If you go and say, oh, well, I can't find my lucky socks or whatever, right? And you're just going to be in a bad mood. You're going to think that things are going to go poorly. And then, okay, my plan, I'm starting third. My plan is I'm going to, jump the start. I'll be on the leader's tail and I'll be second into turn one. Well, if that doesn't happen, then, you're frustrated. So I've found, from a superstition standpoint and even an on-track kind of plan standpoint, it sounds kind of silly, but I almost tend to go the opposite direction, and just kind of take, of course, be aggressive and take what's available, but you never know what's going to happen, right? There's so many variables that go into every very, very small decision, that I found that it's much better and higher performance for me, to not be terribly reliant on superstition, that kind of thing. I do always like to be in the car as early as possible. I always have this fear that I'm going to like somehow not be able to strap in quickly and like miss the grid and miss the race or something for a really dumb reason. But thankfully I've never done that. So, that's kind of my only thing is I am very comfortable. I'd rather sit in a race car for an extra 5 minutes than risk being, risk missing the start or something for a really dumb reason like that.
Sure. It's never a bad thing, Mike, to be prepared, to be organized, and I think like you mentioned, the less mental obstacles you put in your own way, or the less kind of like, I guess things you have to do, to kind of like get yourself in the right gear to go, makes it a lot more streamlined and just, a lot more kind of just palatable to just get on with the job in hand. So I totally see that. And I think that's a fair kind of point too. And Blag, I'm going to bring you back in.
Thanks. Yeah. You've asked all of the with all of the acronyms that I'm thinking, what does that mean? I don't know. But no, I'm going to just ask much more basic questions. So we've had some other really esteemed guests on the podcast as well, and I tend to ask them, steal a little bit of their intellectual property. So I was asking Mario Andretti, what makes someone fast? I've asked, it was very simple answer. No, it was quite complex, as you might imagine. I asked Neil Cole, who's a media sort of personality in motorsport writ large, the art of storytelling. So let me ask you, Mr. Ogren, when someone like me comes to your Skip Barber school, and I've looked on your website, and that 3-day formula school looks amazing. Where do I sign up? What are the common mistakes, or not mistakes, common sort of habits you see people have just out of the gate? What are the main things you're telling people to change when they come off the street and come to your school?
Yeah, I think the biggest one is braking. The way that we brake in a race car is the complete opposite way that we brake in a street car. So normally, if you're coming up to a stoplight or whatever, you kind of brake kind of lightly and then progressively more and more and more till you come to a stop, right? On a racetrack, we want to do the complete opposite. Because we're going the highest speed, possible. Our first brake application needs to be our hardest brake application. And then we kind of, slow the car down as much as possible, as soon as possible. And then we're trailing off the brakes as we come to a corner. So to me, that's kind of the trickiest thing to get for a new driver on a racetrack is breaking these habits that we have from driving on the street. And braking tends to be a very common one. The other one is vision. Again, it's much easier to, and that's one that we can kind of break on the street a little bit. Challenge yourself on the street to see, okay, how far ahead am I looking? So that, instead of something being a reaction, you have much more time to handle it, right? If I'm looking further ahead in a race car, I'm giving my brain better information, which, better things with that information. And I think that, again, those are just kind of street habits that if you're not used to driving on a racetrack, are very difficult to break and very difficult to train. Those are probably the most common, at least kind of first day type things.
Okay. Well, that will be me on day one, but then by day three,
Come on out.
I'll be, yeah, well, I'll just double mortgage the house, and I'll fly over. But no, I look forward to it. Look, another question here, which is maybe because you've kind of grown up in and around cars and motorsport, but we think of the glamorous world. That what's that film called, Grand Prix, with sort of Graham Hill was coincidentally playing a Formula One driver, and I think is it Jim Stewart? All those sorts of glamorous Monaco shots and so on. Is there something commonplace in motorsport that we, as the punter or as the TV audience, or whatever, is it something that we would not expect? What's something we wouldn't expect about either being a driver or being a regular member of the paddock?
Yeah, I think it depends on the level that you're talking about, right? I think, like you said, maybe Formula One, the most obvious example of just, high, a lot of money, both in the stands and the teams, and a lot of that's because it's the pinnacle of motorsports, the highest technology, race cars in the world, and it attracts a certain clientele and business partners that are expecting a very high level. Of course, that trickles down. I think at the level that I'm at, maybe that, I don't know, I like to say in between right now, kind of pro driver, but not, in Formula One or a factory driver or something like that. It's hard work, and I think the way that I like to say it is, I played a lot of sports growing up, and, playing in a game or a tournament or something like that is the reward, right? And, practice is good and useful and whatever, but you have to enjoy the competition aspect of it, because it's what you're working towards. So it's very easy to get, for someone like me, I work my butt off trying to put sponsors together and whatever it takes to get to the racetrack. And it's very easy to, for me, it's something I struggle with, to get to a racetrack and go, I have to win this race. And, everything becomes very difficult and very, high pressure. Right. And I think it's easy for me to forget, and maybe for a lot of listeners or fans or whatever as well, that that needs to be the reward for a racing driver is going, and if you're not having fun driving the race car, you're not doing it right. Even if it is at a very high level, if you are a professional driver, you're getting paid millions of dollars to race a Formula One car. If you're not having fun, you're doing the wrong thing. That's even more important, I think, at kind of my level, where it is, it's incredibly hard work just to get to the track, put together, a sponsor deal or a partnership with Skip Barber like I'm doing to even have a racing seat is very, very difficult. And being able to enjoy the reward of that, being able to race at a high level, at, a VIR or a Sebring or something like that is, it's the reward for the hard work. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it really does make sense, and I think I would still struggle. I'm naturally a competitive person, but I can see both, that duality of something being the reward. Great, we've got the funding, we've qualified, we're going to do the race now. That being the reward, but equally the significant pressure. I mean, does that take its toll? I've asked other people who've been on the show, like what tips they have for keeping themselves feeling fresh. I know just with my normal sort of 9 to 5, I get itchy feet, or I get run down, or the work piles up on you. It takes its toll. Have you got any sort of tips for people about how to stay fresh mentally and physically?
Yeah, I think I'm so in love with racing and racetracks and stuff that it's pretty easy for me, even if I'm just watching from a corner and trying to give students or whatever it is on how to improve. But of course I want to be racing all the time, right? I want to be in a race car, I want to be doing a full season. So when that's not happening for me, or you're the sponsor chase and the funding chase is exhausting. And it's for every very small yes that you get 100 no's. And I've been very lucky to put together the things that I have. but yeah, I think for me, it's, if you're doing something that you really, really love and enjoy, it's easier to not get worn down with it, but you certainly still will. You do anything for long enough and it can become monotonous or too repetitive or something like that. And I think finding for me, it is enjoying those weekends. Like I said, I'm running a partial SRO season this year. Would I love to be doing a full season? Absolutely. But kind of knowing what I'm dealing with this year and being a little bit more content and happy with that has helped. Not to say I'm not pursuing other things and, starting to look at things for next year as much as I can, but, okay, this is what I've got on the schedule for this year. I want to take full advantage of it and enjoy it as much as I can. That's kind of the, maybe a little bit cliche answer, but it's what I found to be the most peaceful for me mentally, if that makes sense.
No, it makes a lot of sense. And I think you started your answer with the kind of main bulk, which is, find what you're passionate about, because it does sound, just from hearing your voice, that, as you say, standing on the corner, watching people, taking that corner and giving them feedback still gives you that energy, which is, fantastic.
Right.
Talking about health and fitness, but completely changing take. A question that we've you're going to realize I don't ask the smart questions. A question that we've been asking guests is about a particularly controversial pizza topping. I mean, can I check that you're a connoisseur of pizzas, sir?
Oh, who's not? Come on.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Good. I mean, you have to check. You never know. So let me ask you this simple question: yay or nay, pineapple on pizza?
Yay.
Yay. Okay.
Yeah.
We have a yay.
I'll give a small amount of context to that. I've been vegetarian for about 5 years now, which is kind of encouraged a little bit more experimentation with pizza toppings, and knowing that again, pineapple being a controversial pizza topping, I will certainly agree with that. But we gave it a go, my wife and I, and we were like, this is pretty good. I don't know why people are hating on it, but.
Okay, well, I think I apologize. Maybe the tone of my voice made you feel like you had to give that context. You should be loud and proud, positive about. I
was going to say, what's I can't read the room very well. Is that a popular or not so popular opinion in this pod here?
We spoke to the most famous Italian American Formula One driver of all time, and he seemed to take umbrage at the suggestion that pizza and pineapple would be in the same room. So
I can understand that. Yeah.
Yes, but it's not for me to comment, of course. The final question, and actually the point I didn't make was when you were talking about energy and keeping yourself sort of in a good space. It sounds like you were talking about the team that you form with your wife. That sounds like a really important sort of cornerstone of that as well for you, which is fantastic. You mentioned your team, Motorsport, your brand. Where can we keep up to date on your progress and the progress of Motorsport?
Yeah, so thank you for asking. I'm fairly active on Instagram. It's where I post most of my stuff, most of my updates, and it's at Mike.Ogren. So MIKE.OGREN. That's where I post pretty much everything racing related that I'm up to, as well as some non-racing related stuff. I do a little bit on Facebook at Mike Ogren Racing, and then we have our website, which is racemotorsports.com. But the social media at Mike Ogren on Mike.Ogren on Instagram is you'll certainly know more than you'll ever want to know about me and my racing career.
Well, we hope to see some pineapples on pizzas featuring in your Instagram feed very soon. and on that intellectual note, I'll hand back to Denz, who will help close the interview out. Over to you, Denz.
Oh, well, thank you there, Blag. And Mike, you've been a supreme guest as well. We definitely need to bring you back on the show later on in the year, to track your progress and just to see what's the latest, in the world of motorsport too. You've been amazing.
Yeah, sure. Thank you guys so much for having me. This is actually the first podcast I've been on, so thank you very much for having me. It's been a blast, and I've got Sebring race coming up next month. Would love to come back on sometime after that and touch base.
Oh, absolutely. Well, we're looking forward to that, and we're wishing you all the best as well, Mike, because you're a stand-up guy, top driver, and we're super, super proud of the progress and just your story as well, man. You're amazing. But one last question I wanted to leave this podcast on as well, Mike. Let's say, Zach Brown, because Zach Brown seems to be a man offering a lot of people contracts these days. Let's say Zach Brown, he pops his head round the door and he says, Mike, I've got an opportunity for you, my man. You could either race in IndyCar, Formula One, GT3. Choice is up to you. What series would you want to race in for your debut kind of step with McLaren? And who would you pick as a teammate?
Ooh, wow. That's
bombshells.
Good question. Yeah. So my answer is GT3. But I will say the opportunity to race or even drive a Formula One car would be incredibly difficult to pass up. However, I think kind of as has been alluded to or maybe clear from my background, my open wheel experience is not so extensive. I just don't think I'd be terribly good at being in a Formula One car. Not bad, I would hope, but not at the level that I'd want to be competitive in Formula One. But I think at GT3, GT3 McLaren, yeah, that's something I could get down with. And a teammate, oh man, well, there's what, like 10 McLaren signed drivers that are all going to need, for like 5 seats next year, right? So give me any one of those guys, I'd be pretty okay with that.
Awesome, man. I think we might have to line you up either with Pato Ward or maybe the honey badger himself, Daniel Ricciardo. If he manages, to hold on to a seat.
Amen.
Oh, awesome. Mike, you've been a star and a legend, man. Thank you so much for joining us. And guys, listening to this as well, make sure you follow Mike Ogren on all of his social media platforms as well. Make sure you keep tabs as well on the SRO Series 2, now that we got a familiar name in there as well. So awesome to see and to witness. And make sure as well that you like, share, subscribe this video. Subscribe as well, obviously. And until next time, it's been your dynamic duo of F1blag and AMG Denz, aka modern day David Attenborough. That's a new one. But until next time, guys, take it easy, have lots of fun, be safe, and we'll catch you soon. Peace.
Bye.